back to NFL Spotlight. I am your host, Ari Meirov. We are continuing our team-by-team previews here on the show. Make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube channel. And we are on to the Atlanta Falcons. And joining me today, he does an excellent job covering the team for ESPN. It is Marc Raimondi. Marc, thank you so much for doing this. How's everything going?
Everything is good. It's about 85 degrees and humid in Atlanta right now. I am not at practice, but I will be tomorrow, and I'm sure I'll be sweating.
I love it. We had Teron Davenport, your colleague, on the show last week. He was in town for joint practices. He mentioned the exact same thing. So the weather is clearly hot down there in Flowery Branch. And I want to talk a little bit about this team because last year was obviously a little bit of a roller coaster, disappointing end to the year. There was obviously a big benching at quarterback. Let me just start with a general question. The overall vibes with this organization entering year 2 of Raheem Morris, year 1 of Michael Penix under center. Like, where are the vibes right now at training camp?
I think the vibes are pretty high. I would say maybe even higher than last year when Kirk Cousins was the incumbent at quarterback. And some of that is Michael Penix Jr. The organization is absolutely a big believer in the skills of Michael Penix Jr. And I think that the defense this year is something that the franchise is a little bit more excited about compared to last year, where, the personnel wasn't necessarily there. They invested a lot in the draft, of course, in defense, a little bit in free agency as well. And the biggest thing to me is new defensive coordinator Jeff Ulbrich and the energy that he's brought, the intensity that he's brought, the pedigree that he has brought as well. And I think all those things combined have made for, a pretty positive outlook, I would say, so far in Falcons camp. Now, I would preface that, Ari, by saying that I think all 32 teams probably have a positive outlook at this juncture, right? It's training camp. It's hope season. We'll see how it all shakes out, but vibes are pretty good out in Flowery Branch.
The easy thing for me right now is probably to go to the offense because everyone wants to talk about Michael Penix and how it's all looking. I actually want to start with the defense because, like you said, it was such an emphasis of the offseason. There was such a pass rush problem last year. Let me just start with the guy who was leading it, Jeff Ulbrich. You mentioned him a second ago. How much of a difference has it been him coming in? It just was pretty obvious last year Jimmy Lake was not the guy for the job. It was a tough decision maybe for Raheem to move on from his friend, but it was just not it. How is Jeff Ulbrich doing so far as the lead guy leading the defense?
So far, so good. I mean, the one thing that I've noticed in practice is just the level of intensity and energy has been taken up a pretty significant notch compared to last offseason. And what I mean by that is the defense is really getting in the offense's faces. The pass rush has been, again, it's training camp, it's August, but the pass rush in training camp this year has looked a lot more formidable, a lot more potent than it did last year at this time. So take that for what it's worth. The guys are it just feels like they're hitting harder, in some cases. It feels like they're really buying into what Jeff Ulbrich brings. And he has a mantra, about more violence and more energy and more attitude. And that is something that certainly a few of the guys on the Falcons team have really embraced and kind of they've taken part of.
While there were some additions to this defense, I do want to focus on one departure first. Grady Jarrett no longer being there after 10 years. I was a bit surprised that they did that. I mean, great guy on the field, off the field, still a really good player, got paid a lot of money to go to Chicago. Has the organization felt his presence missing, or is everything moved on and it's new guys coming in?
That was a tough one because him and Jake Matthews are the most tenured veterans on this team, and then they're both team leaders. And Grady Jarrett was, without a doubt, the leader of that defense. He was the heart and soul of that defense. And from an on-field perspective, yeah, it's a loss at the interior defensive line position. But in the locker room, in the meeting rooms, that's an even bigger loss, in my opinion, especially as he gets older. And that was a hard thing for the franchise, for owner Arthur Blank. He even released a statement about it. It was tough because Grady Jarrett he's not only was he with the Falcons for 10 years and he was on the team that went to the Super Bowl, as we know, but he's from Atlanta. He's from Georgia. He's from, right in the area here. And he was beloved. He has his charity here, and his mom is very active in the community here. So it was a big decision that the Falcons had. I did not think they would actually pull the trigger on that, and I thought that they would be able to come to some type of an agreement with Grady Jarrett. But I think that at the end of the day, a lot of it was probably Grady Jarrett himself saying, like, yeah, I want to go see if I can win somewhere. He had, when he was very young, he had some winning seasons, but Falcons haven't been to the playoffs since 2017. It's been a minute, right? For most of his career, he never saw the playoffs. So I can't really blame him for wanting to try something else. But yeah, certainly a void that has to be filled now, at least from a leader perspective, by guys like Kaden, Ellis, and Jesse Bates.
Let me think about the guys who are kind of replacing him there on the interior. There's the veteran David Arnimata. There's also a second round pick that they had in Rook Orororo, which another player who I was surprised they took him where they did last year. Have any of those guys stepped up to the point where it's like, all right, we could, live without Grady Jarrett for this season?
Well, first of all, that was an excellent pronunciation of Rook Orororo. I think it's the best one that I've heard thus far. So congrats on that, Ari. So to your question, they are depending a lot on young players in the interior of the defensive line. And I'm talking about Rook. I'm talking about Brandon Dorlus, who was also a draft pick last year. And Zach Harrison will be the third. He's a third-year player, but he's still a really young guy. He's under 25 years old. And all those guys are under 25. And for Rook and for Dorlus, they really did not play much last year. But I got to say, I've been really impressed with how they performed so far in training camp and in the preseason games as well. Dorlus was one of the stars of the first preseason game against the Lions. He looked really good, had a sack, forced fumble in that game. Zach Harrison is a guy that I feel like that, once he gets it, once he figures it out, because he played the edge as a rookie, and then last year they moved him inside. They wanted him to gain weight and then move inside. So I feel like he hasn't really gotten his footing yet, but I feel like when he does, he can be a real impact player. And Rook looks a lot. I mean, he's in incredible shape. He's put on a lot of muscle this season. And again, a guy that looks greatly improved from last year when he really did not play a whole lot. Now, all that is to say, it's still a lot to be putting on young players, especially at that position. So they're going to need really breakout seasons from, one or two, maybe even three of those guys to really be as effective as they want to be in this new defense.
Let me ask you about the edge rushers. That was by far the biggest emphasis of the offseason and by far the biggest emphasis in the draft. Taking Jalon Walker earlier in the draft and making the trade that a lot of people had reaction to of James Pearce giving up the first round pick in 2026 to the Rams. How have both those guys looked so far? And I would imagine the organization is expecting those sack numbers to go up this year.
James Pearce Jr. has been, you could make an argument that he has been the MVP of the defense so far this summer. And that's mostly in practice, but he did play real well on Friday night against the Titans. He played great in that game. So his PFF score was, pretty darn high. His pass rush win rate was pretty high in that game. He had the pressure that led to an interception in that game as well. So he has played his butt off, honestly, man. He really has. He's been a guy that has surprised just by the amount of effort that he's putting into just every snap. So much so that he's gotten under the skin of the offensive line on several occasions, and there have been some skirmishes. Caleb McGarry, the right tackle, has taken umbrage with some of James Pearce's his demeanor at times, and so is Matthew Bergeron, the left guard. So it's been a much more intense summer compared to last year, I would say. And James Pearce Jr. is probably one of the main guys behind that. He's a guy that, there was some questions about him going into the drafts, about character and about maturity, that I think even some teams took him off of their draft board. But Raheem Morris spent a lot of time with James Pearce Jr. in the draft process. Even in the days before the draft, they were together in Carolina, where Pearce is from, and they were sold on him as a human being and as a player. And as a player, it's obvious, right? The dude is 6'5". He runs like a gazelle. He probably needs to put on some more size, more muscle, but the traits are there for him to be like an elite pass rusher. It's just a matter of kind of putting it together. But yeah, so far so good for Pearce. But yeah, so the traits are there. All the things are there. It's just a matter about putting it all together. And then as far as Jalon Walker, by the way, people hated that they traded up into the first round. And I get what they're saying. They kind of mortgaged next year's draft, but Pearce, to take you kind of inside a little bit, Pearce was the guy they wanted at 15, Ari. He was the guy that they wanted at 15. And then they didn't think that Jalon Walker was going to fall to them at 15. So they had to make a decision. They were like, all right, Walker's too good to pass up at 15, right? He's from Georgia. He's right down the block, right? We know how good he is. We know his versatility. So they took him, And then immediately they started working the phones to get back into the first round to draft Pearce, specifically Pearce, not Mike Green, not anyone like that. They wanted James Pearce Jr. and that's why. As far as Walker goes, it's been a rough training camp for him because he's been out a lot. He's been injured. He had a hamstring injury. Now he's dealing with a groin injury. They're not, according to the Falcons and according to Walker himself, these are not long-term significant things, but they're just annoying enough to keep him out of like 11 on 11s in practice. And he did play the first preseason game. He did not play last week. I'm not sure about Friday night. I'm inclined to say he probably won't play, but I don't know. I guess it just depends on how he does tomorrow in practice and how it shapes up. But from what they've seen out of him, they like, and a lot of it is also off the field. They just love his football IQ. They love his demeanor. Raheem Morris has said, which is a crazy thing to say about a rookie. Raheem Morris said that he's like a guy that could be a future captain of the team. Again, crazy thing to say about a rookie, but that's how they feel about Jalon Walker, the person. We have not seen enough, unfortunately, of Jalon Walker, the football player, this summer, but hopefully that will change soon.
Jalon Walker, a lot of praise for his character throughout the pre-draft process, the son of a coach. So he's somebody who's understands the game and of course all the people around it. So it does make a lot of sense. You mentioned this name before, and I think nationally people do not know this name at all. Kaden Ellis has been so good for this team. He's led the league in pressure percentage for the last 4 years. I don't think people realize that. How important is he for this defense, and how good could he be now that he has these type of guys around him?
I would say that, it's him, Jesse Bates, and AJ Terrell are probably the three most important people on this defense, the three best players on that defense, the three veterans and leaders. And I would say that that Ellis and Bates are probably the two biggest leaders of the defense. And Kaden Ellis is one of those guys that, he does not make the headlines. In many cases, what he does is not, it's not flashy, right? He doesn't create a spectacle. He certainly doesn't, talk trash. I mean, on the field he does. I'll say that. But in interviews, he's very calm and straightforward, and he's not a guy that creates any kind of controversy. But man, he really is. He was so important to their team last year. I mean, I don't know where they would have been on defense without him last year because they had a tough year defensively, and he was really like a bright spot on that defense because of his versatility. When he blitzes, when he attacks the quarterback, as you mentioned, the stats don't lie. He's incredibly effective at that. It's not his only duty, right? He's the Mike. He's the green dot. He's kind of like the leader in the middle of the defense as far as that. He's the one that that relays the plays to the guys. So he's really important in that role. But when you ask him to do other things like blitz and pressure, he could do that extremely effectively. So his versatility is fantastic. He's almost kind of like a Jalon Walker. Jalon Walker is almost kind of like, his what his player comp is probably like a Kaden Ellis, a guy like that. So he's just a vital guy for the defense. And, I really think a vital guy for what Jeff Ulbrich wants to do. Jeff Ulbrich was a linebacker, right? He played linebacker, and Kaden Ellis is definitely the kind of guy with the skill set that he could sink his teeth into.
I want to ask you about the secondary before we go to the offense here. You mentioned the two leaders on the back end with AJ Terrell and Jesse Bates. How is the rest of this secondary shaping up? Because it feels like there's a bunch of guys who we're not really sure about. Is that the right assumption of that?
I think so. So the Falcons are really banking on two rookies to be playing a lot this year in the secondary. Potentially even like starting relatively soon, maybe even from day one. And that's Xavier Watts, who is the safety out of Notre Dame, and of course Billy Bowman Jr., he was a safety at Oklahoma, but they have moved him now to nickel corner, and he is competing with D. Alford, who was the nickel corner last year. And they do play a lot of nickel. Every team plays a lot of nickel these days in the NFL, right? So that's the competition right there. And then Watts is kind of battling Jordan Fuller, who's a veteran. He played with Raheem Morris with the Rams. They won the Super Bowl together. So that's kind of the battle going on at safety opposite Jesse Bates. But I think the Falcons really believe that by the middle of the season, both of those rookies are going to be starting, and they love them. They love their IQ. They love their energy. Watts has had, he's been a little dinged up as well, kind of like Walker, where he's missed a lot of 11 on 11. But he's been out there more than Walker at this point. And he's definitely shown signs. I wouldn't say that he's done anything incredibly impressive yet. Bowman's been impressive on special teams. He's definitely played well there. I don't know if he's going to win the job outright from D. Alford in the nickel, but he could. And then the second cornerback is Mike Hughes, who's a guy that, he's a good tackler. He's a bit of a thumper. He can get some. He got a couple of forced fumbles in practice this summer. He's a solid player. I wouldn't say he's a spectacular player, but if everything is going the way they want it to with the pass rush and the linebacker core, he's a solid number 2 corner. They feel so. And the safeties, I think Justin Simmons they signed last year, and I don't think he really produced the way they hoped he would opposite Jesse Bates. And I think they feel a lot better about their secondary going into this season. And I would just say their defense as a whole. There's a lot more. Like if we were talking last year, Ari, there was not a lot of competitions, and that wasn't a good thing because it was not a great defense from a personnel standpoint, and there weren't many battles, and it was kind of already set in stone. And this year there's definitely more competition. There's more depth, without a doubt.
Is it, just before I go to the is it safe to say that Raheem Morris, who is a defensive-minded head coach, is pretty satisfied with where this defense is going into the 2025 season?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, as far as like what the personnel is going to the season and what the system is going to be, which you have Ulbrich, there's going to be some growing pains, of course, because those guys played a different system last year. Last year was very like bend but don't break under Jimmy Lake. There was a lot of I mean, this is a team that had the worst opponent quarterback completion percentage in the NFL last year. So they were allowing the quarterback to kind of just like dink and dunk them to death at times. And then they give up a big play. There would be a miscommunication in the secondary. They give up a big play and then they were behind the 8 ball. And that happened all too many times. They couldn't get off the field. The time of possession was like, it was crazy. That Washington game last year was the biggest, the biggest example where, the second half, the offense is playing well with Penix, in his second start, but the defense just can't get off the field, just cannot get, the ball back to Penix. And that was really frustrating. So this is going to be a lot more of like an attacking, aggressive defense compared to last year.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I wanted to start here with the defense, because if they want any success this year, it's going to have to be on that side of the ball, a big jump compared to where it was in 2024. All right, let me get to the offense here. I'll start with the obvious question. Michael Penix Jr. is taking over. How has he looked so far? Is he ready for this moment? And how have the players responded to him being QB1?
He's definitely ready from a mental mindset standpoint. I don't think there's any doubt about that. They just love his makeup. They just love his poise. They love how cool and calm he is. I mean, albeit there was a fight last week that he was involved in. The Titans, that was kind of crazy. That was a little bit unexpected to see the quarterback get thrown to the bottom of the pile. But maybe that's a good thing too. He's very competitive. He is ultra competitive. And I don't see any spotlight being too bright for Michael Penix Jr. I think that he's that kind of quarterback. He likes the spotlight. He likes the big moments. I mean, 4th down and 13, the 4th and goal from the 13 against the Commanders on the road, playoffs on the line, and he somehow zips the ball into Kyle Pitts' hands, on a diving catch in the 4th quarter to tie the game up. I mean, that was an incredible throw from a then rookie quarterback. And this guy can make every throw you could possibly imagine. I mean, his arm talent is out of this world. He's got one of the best arms in the NFL, period. Now, the question is going to be, can he master the intermediate and short routes? Because that's going to be what separates him and makes him an elite quarterback, because he can throw the deep ball as well as anybody, and he can zip it into incredibly tight spaces. Like the velocity and his release, absurd, right? Absurd. But he has struggled at times in practice this year with the shorter stuff. And sometimes he's zipping it into these guys that are 7 yards away from him, and they can't hold on to it. They're dropping the ball. That was a struggle in his first 3 games last year too, where guys were dropping his passes. There were 2 drops last year that ended up in interceptions. And I think he threw 3 interceptions, and 2 of them were on drop passes that just ended up in the defender's hands. So it's one of those things where he has to kind of get a better feel for the touch passes, improve his accuracy on the short and the intermediate stuff. But I mean, the guy is going to make big plays down the field on a regular basis. He's going to miss. He's basically a rookie. He's like a rookie 0.5. He's going to be inconsistent, but he is going to make big plays. I mean, there was one stat that I saw. I had it in one of my articles recently where only one other quarterback, I think he was tied with Anthony Richardson for the amount of air yards per completion in his 3 games. It was a short sample size, but the dude puts the ball in the air, and you have Drake London out there, so he's probably going to catch it.
I do want to ask you just about the quarterback room just as a whole, because Kirk Cousins is still on this team. He's there with Michael Penix. People around the NFL, other teams are surprised by it. Is it a weird dynamic? Has Kirk just been there doing his job as the backup? What are the plans for him? Is he going to be on this team with a trade? Like, what is the plan of here of Kirk?
It has been incredibly mundane this summer. You would think that there would be some drama. There really hasn't been at all. Kirk Cousins has played really quite well, backing up Penix in practice. He's played great. In fact, I would say maybe even better or as good as he did last year. Raheem Morris said that he feels like Kirk is more mobile now, that he's healthier, and Kirk said that himself, that he feels healthier now than he did at this point last season. But this is a 14-year veteran quarterback who has won a ton of games, who's put up a ton of great stats, who's made a lot of money. And he's not a backup quarterback. You know, he's a better quarterback than I would say. I don't want to say half the league, but like a third of the league starters right now, maybe. You know, he's at least as good as those guys. But the situation in Atlanta is different, and you know, he would like to go and start somewhere. The Falcons know that. He's made that very clear. But the question is where? You know, who has an opening for a starting quarterback, because he has a no trade clause and he is not going to go anywhere and be a backup. He's already a backup in Atlanta. He doesn't need to go be a backup somewhere else, right? And his wife's family is from Atlanta, so they're comfortable here. As far as that goes, again, he'd love to be somewhere else to start, but right now that does not seem to be in the cards. The Falcons are going to be keeping a close eye on what happens around the league, of course, at quarterback, as they normally would anyway. And they will certainly listen to offers for Kirk Cousins, but I feel like there's a pretty good chance that Kirk Cousins is with the Falcons through 2025, through the season. I really do believe that. And look, I think that Michael Penix Jr. got hurt quite a bit in college. He had 4 season-ending injuries. And Kirk Cousins is a hell of an insurance policy if something goes wrong with Michael Penix. The question, and I think the biggest issue, Ari, is like the Falcons have a really tough beginning schedule. I mean, they have Tampa first. They have Minnesota on the road week 2. And then a little bit later on, they have the Bills, they have the Niners, both at home, both in prime time. They have Washington in there. It's a really tough, like, first 6 games. And the question for me is, if Michael Penix Jr. struggles over those first 6 games and they go 2-4, you know, I mean, the fans are going to come out and be asking for Kirk Cousins. You just know it. That's just the NFL. That's what it is. And you don't really want that on the shoulders of a young quarterback like Michael Penix Jr. You just don't. And that was one of the issues, if not the biggest issue, why you don't want Kirk Cousins on the team, because you don't want that to happen. You don't want the struggles to, you know, result in people calling for Penix to be benched. That's not what you want. But that's the situation that they're in. You know, it's a good insurance policy. Things are status quo right now. We'll see what happens. The NFL is a crazy league, as you know, so you know, things can change in a heartbeat, but that's where it is. It's been pretty boring, honestly, so far. But that's what for your quarterback room, you want it to be as boring as possible.
That is 100% right. But you did take the words right out of my mouth, because the dynamic of if he does struggle, now fans are asking for Kirk. Has that been brought up to Raheem? Have you heard anything from the organization just about the potential reality that, hey, we get it, he's a good insurance policy. If he gets injured, it's a perfect backup. But what if he does struggle and they're calling his name and now it's in the quarterback's head? Is that not in the organization's mind?
Oh, it certainly is. I mean, they're not gonna talk about it with us, but they're not. I mean, look, these are football people. They know how these things go. They're not ignorant to that type of deal. But look, the one thing that I'll say about the Falcons and the front office and Terry Fontenot, the GM, is that they don't really care what people think. You know, they don't really care. They have their, you know, say what you will about the moves that Terry Fontenot has made, and people have said a whole lot about drafting Penix number 8, moving back into the first round to get Pearce. He doesn't care. I mean, they got skewered in the media and by pundits over these moves that they've made, and they double down and they're doing things their way, and I credit them for that, for sticking to it. You know, they have a vision and they're committed to the vision no matter what everyone else is saying. There's something to be said for that, right? Right or wrong, there's something to be said for that. So they don't really care about that type of deal. If the Boo Birds come out, you know, for Penix and they want Kirk, they're gonna weather the storm. That's the plan, I imagine. And they feel like Penix has the kind of mindset and mentality, excuse me, to not really, let those things go to his head. They feel like he's going to be above that, and it's not going to phase him. So we'll see what happens.
Well, we all know about the weapons on this offense, but John Robinson, there's obviously Drake London. I wanted to ask you about Kyle Pitts, who every single year at this time of year, everyone is ready for the breakout. It just doesn't happen. Does this feel different this time around with Michael Penix Jr., who it feels like he's been trying to hype him up at the podium so far here in the training camp?
It does feel different. I don't know if it will be different, but it does feel different. The biggest difference, I would say, Ari, is that Penix and Pitts have really developed a great bond off the field. And they're golf buddies. I wrote an article for ESPN.com about that ran yesterday, ran Monday, if you want to check that out. And I've only been on the beat for a little bit over a year, but Kyle Pitts gave me the best quotes that I've ever gotten from Kyle Pitts about this relationship with Michael Penix. And I think that's a good sign. I really do. I think that he's very comfortable with Penix. They ride to games together on game day. And I think that it's shaping up to be something where Penix really trusts Pitts. And he showed that on that fourth down play that we mentioned before against Washington. And I think Penix knows that this team, for the offense to be as good as they believe it can be, and it can be really good, they need Kyle Pitts to be operating at a high level. And I think Penix knows that. I think that there is intentionality about this relationship. I think it's something that Penix has definitely, and I would say Pitts to an extent too, has been, they know what this relationship could lead to. And Pitts told me that he studied other dynamics between quarterback and tight end, Pat Mahomes, Travis Kelce, when Matt Ryan was in Atlanta, and Tony Gonzalez. He studied those things, and he wants to have that with Penix. And that's a really good sign, because Pitts was not saying that about Desmond Ridder or Marcus Mariota or Kirk Cousins. And this is Pitts's sixth quarterback in 5 seasons. So it's been a little bit of a abrupt go from that standpoint. But again, we have to see. I think that Kyle Pitts, even the last 2 seasons, is probably a better tight end than people give him credit for. But because the bar was so high, being the number 4 pick and then having that rookie season that he did, he's still a plus tight end. He just hasn't been spectacular. And I don't even think they need him to be spectacular, but they could, if he gets 800 yards, and a handful of touchdowns, I think they'd be pretty happy with that.
There's one thing I've learned when it comes to the NFL. Players in contract years, there's extra motivation. And Kyle Pitts is in a contract year as well this season. One more question on the offense before I wrap this up. The offensive line probably doesn't get enough credit. Jake Matthews, Chris Lindstrom, Caleb McGarry, Matthew Bergeron. Drew Dahlman left in free agency, but it sounds like, you tell me if I'm right, they are okay with the current center position. Like, what's the story there?
Yeah, Ryan Newsel is their center now, and he is a guy that was a developmental guy, in the Arthur Smith regime. He was an undrafted free agent, and he just worked his way up. This is a really cool NFL success story. A guy from Appalachian State who no one really thought was ever going to be, a starter in the NFL, and now here, let alone maybe even on an NFL roster, and now here he is, and he's a guy that everyone in that room loves. He's a guy that they trust. And it is a very tight-knit group. And Dwayne Ledford is the offensive line coach for the Falcons, and he has been for quite some time. And, he really has developed this really great, people have all said it's almost like cult-like, like that offensive line room where it's like, it's very tight-knit. It's very drink the Kool-Aid. They really believe in what they're doing. And, Lindstrom is one of the best guards in the entire league. Jake Matthews is ageless. He's never missed a game. He's an Iron Man, which is insane from a left tackle who's now, in his 30s. Matthew Bergeron is a guy that we're going to be talking a lot more about this year, because last year was year 2 for him, and he made a big jump, and he's nasty. He's a bad dude on the left side for them against the run and the pass. He's kind of like I would say that he has become almost how do I put this? Like the tone setter, because he talks a ton of smack. He gets in people's faces. He's the guy that was wanted to kill James Pearce Jr. a few weeks ago in practice, which is a great dynamic. I love that. I love that stuff. I covered the UFC for 11 years, Ari, so I love the fisticuffs. But it's definitely an underrated line because there's not a lot of like quote unquote star players, but even like Caleb McGarry, excellent against the run. It's going to be a little bit of a learning curve for him covering the blind side of Michael Penix. He's a lefty, but they're pretty confident in Newsel and what the line is. It's a line that's been together for a very long time outside of Newsel, but he's been in the room with them for a long time.
All right, Mark, I really appreciate all the time you've given me here so far. I want to ask you the final question to ask everybody who comes on here, then I have one more thing as well. But this is the NFL Spotlight Show every single Tuesday. We have somebody from the NFL, could be anybody, player, coach, executive, who deserves more recognition for what they do. You cover this team. You're there every single day. You're boots on the ground. You kind of know everybody in that building. Who is somebody from the Falcons organization that maybe needs a little bit more spotlight?
So you said player. It could be a player as well.
Player, coach, executive, whatever you want.
It's really hard because I feel like the Falcons are, I mean, granted, they have not made playoffs in a very long time, but it's an organization that just doesn't get talked about a lot on a national level, right? It's not one of like the blue bloods of the NFL, right? So there's a lot of people like that, but I want to take the time to shout out DeMarco Hellams a little bit because he was a 7th round pick a few years ago, and also kind of a guy like Newsel that was borderline, practice squad guy, NFL player, or it might end up doing something else with his life. And he has worked incredibly hard. He won the starting job 2 years ago from Richie Grant, and it seemed like he was on this ascent to being, the regular starter for the Falcons at safety. And last year, he was in line to be the starter again alongside Jesse Bates. And he's kind of like their emotional leader on defense in many ways. In terms of like, dude just likes to hit people. I mean, he just likes to hit. I mean, the first preseason game against the Lions, dude was just throwing his body around. Anyway, what I wanted to say was that he got hurt. He got a high ankle sprain in the preseason last year. He missed all of last season, and it was heartbreaking for him and for the entire roster because he's a guy that people rally around. And not having him out there is almost like you almost diminish your emotions when you don't have DeMarco Hellams. And, he's back, this summer, and he's played awfully well, and he's going to make the roster. I'm certain of that. I don't know if he'll end up starting because they do have that competition with Fuller and with Xavier Watts, but he's going to play special teams. And I think that we're going to see a big play and a big hit somewhere from DeMarco Hellams. My first introduction to DeMarco Hellams was last year. Last year, there was construction being done in Flowery Branch where the Falcons train, right, their facility. And so they had no fans at all during training camp in their facility. So they did a few open practices. One was at like a local high school, and one was at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It's open practice, right? But it's a practice. There's no hitting, right? I think Kirk Cousins puts the ball over the middle to Ray McLeod. And DeMarco Hellams absolutely just destroys this man. And everyone's like, holy crap, like, what the hell? That's the only hit that we saw like in practice all last summer. And, he kind of got a talking to, but that's the kind of guy that he just wants to go out there and hit people. Let the man go and hit somebody. And I just love that. He's a throwback guy. Jeff Ulbrich referred to him as a tone setter. He's definitely a guy that fits in so well with like the intensity that Ulbrich wants to bring. So I just wanted to shout out to DeMarco Hellams a little bit. 7th round pick, a guy that anyone in the NFL will want him on your team.
I love it. Former 7th round pick, like you said, out of Alabama. We've had a lot of 7th round picks and undrafted guys who have made it here on the show. So if he shows some glimpses of doing that, we will put the request in and try to get him here on the show. Mark, last thing for you before I let you go. You do have a new book, Say Hello to the Bad Guys. Like you said, you covered UFC. It's right behind you. The poster is behind you. Wrestling, UFC, all of it. I used to follow you kind of religiously a little bit because I like the UFC. So I was surprised when you came over to our world, I'll be honest with it. But when it comes to all that, the book and everything, what's it about and how did you even like get into putting that together?
Yeah, so it's called Sales of the Bad Guys: How Professional Wrestling's New World Order Changed America. And most guys that are around my age, a little bit older, a little bit younger, grew up watching wrestling in the 1990s. It's just the way it was. It was a huge part of the culture. There's a few NFL players who are still diehard wrestling fans even now. George Kittle is a massive fan. Deion Dawkins is, every WWE he could possibly attend, he goes to these things. And there's a bunch of guys around the league that are like that as well. But anyway, so most people of my age were watching this era of wrestling, and this is the storyline and the group, the NWO, that kicked it all off. It was the catalyst for the biggest boom period in wrestling history, where it ended up in 98, 99, where more than 10 million people combined were watching wrestling on Monday nights between the two shows, WCW and the WWF. So much so, to bring back to football, Ari, it was actually cutting into the ratings of Monday Night Football, which just does not happen. Like, there was a 10% decline in 98 in Monday Night Football ratings because of wrestling. And just to think about that, it's like mind-blowing, because football is like untouchable right now. But that's how things were in the 90s. Wrestling was a big, big, big part of culture. And it has played a part in shaping who we are as a country, as a culture now. Because in order to shape culture, you need to shape the people that are in the culture. And those were the folks that were watching back then. And now we're all adult. Now we're, 40 or whatever, or we're 35, or we're, 60. And we're doing whatever it is that we're doing in the world. And it has helped shape us. And then we have used that in many cases, in our lives. And that's kind of the thesis of the book, the hypothesis of the book. And the vehicle for the hypothesis is the NWO being the catalyst of that, the anti-hero, the villain. That was the first time that was like a thing for, in America, where the anti-hero and the villain became the protagonist. I mean, I'm not saying the NWO was, but that time period, it was the counterculture 90s, and the NWO was right there with, like the Pearl Jams and the Nirvanas and, the NWA and gangster rap and what have you. That's kind of what the book is about.
Awesome. Really appreciate you, Mark. Love having a Queens guy on here. We will definitely do it again. And best of luck here this season. Everyone could, of course, check your work on ESPN, get your book wherever books are sold, and of course, follow you on all social media platforms. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.